So a while back, almost a year ago, I made a video on where I went into my thoughts on ODIN being a potential traitor, and even now that's my most viewed video at the moment, but we've had a lot of chapters come out since then, and so what I want to do today is just give an update on where I stand on this because a lot's changed, and I have to admit, I still think ODIN is one of the biggest key players in the manga right now. And so I just want to take a look at some of the things I explained in that video because there are some things that turned out to be true regarding Buddha and some things that turned out to be wrong, of course, but regardless, I just want to give an update, I guess, on where I stand with ODIN now and how I think this will affect the overall future of the story. Especially for anyone who has no idea what the ODIN traitor theory is or hasn't seen my video, this is gonna be a fun discussion, so yeah, let's just get into it. So basically, my whole ODIN traitor theory pretty much started with chapter 34, when we see a very suspicious shot of ODIN after he has some dialogue with Zeus, and I think everyone will agree that this whole scene by the fountain was just super sketchy, right? Like, I think the majority who were reading the manga when this chapter came out will agree that this is probably why round 5 felt so dull maybe, and it's probably because everyone was just so caught up in wondering if Loki was right about Buddha being a traitor rather than, I guess, paying their attention to Shiva and Raiden. And at the time there were just so many theories going around, like if Bishamon had some ulterior motive to showing up, or if Zeus had something behind the scenes that he was working on. So in other words, this is where the whole traitor talk really took off for anyone who wasn't around when this chapter came out. And of course, it's been a long time since chapter 34 was out, so looking back on this whole scene by the fountain, it's easy to look now in retrospect and say that this was just in large part setting up the fight between Buddha and Bisha, or rather Zero, for round 6. But I think there's a lot more to this fountain scene than just setting up Buddha versus Zero, especially now that we know Buddha ended up being the traitor and that the 7 gods of fortune ended up being Zero. It just begs the question why ODIN was here at all, especially when we look at ODIN's reaction to Buddha betraying the gods at the start of round 6. It's a completely different face than the one he makes after his dialogue with Zeus. So it's a really interesting comparison that just makes me wonder what ODIN actually thinks about Buddha going traitor. Because when ODIN tells Buddha in chapter 34 if he was prepared to make himself an enemy of the gods, this is one of the first real times we've ever seen like a full-on sentence by ODIN, and when he says this, it's almost like this voice of his is heard throughout the entire arena. And it happens in a way that's like when ODIN speaks, we all listen, and on a surface level he just looks obviously pissed off, right? But again, I keep going back to that face he makes after his dialogue with Zeus, right? Because it's a completely different reaction. At least with Zeus, he allows Buddha to go through with the betrayal and even explains his reasoning for allowing it in, you know, typical Zeus behavior, nothing unusual. And when we see Zeus by the fountain, even then he just reacted the same way as he did with Shiva, just showing sheer intimidation, but this time on Buddha, and you know, again, typical Zeus behavior, nothing unusual. Now, if you compare that with ODIN's reaction by the fountain, we honestly have no idea why he makes this face, and I think it was purposely shown to us just to keep in the back of our minds, I guess, that ODIN is up to something, we just don't know what at the moment. And so far I haven't even gotten into the theory part of ODIN being a traitor, as in his motives for betraying the gods. Right now I'm just kind of glossing over the premise of it and where it's all coming from. But what also made him suspicious is the confrontation alone between Loki and Buddha, because we've actually seen Loki do this before, and I'm referring to the beginning of round 4 where we see Loki questioning Heracles, and when he questions him, it's ironically about his relationship with the Valkyries. And I know this confrontation between them is short and all, but my point is we've seen Loki do this twice now, where he goes personally to interrogate someone on their relationship with the Valkyries. And it should also be said that Loki is a Norse god, and unlike the Norse gods, we've seen plenty of the Greek gods hanging out with each other, even non-fighters like Ares and Hermes, and even the Hindu gods as well. So it's common for gods of the same pantheon to just be with each other, and yet we don't see that with the Norse gods, especially now that we've seen Thor in the background just watching the fights on his own away from Loki and ODIN. It just begs the question as to why, because we're seeing characters like Zeus and Kojiro make a reappearance, even Jack, but when we see Thor again, he's just silently in the background, almost ready to fight since we see him with his hammer. So it's just awfully curious as to what's going on with him, and why is Loki interrogating people on their relationship with the Valkyries? So I think you guys get the idea. ODIN is sus, Loki is too, and to an extent I think even Thor could be a part of this too. So now that I think you guys get the picture, this is where my whole theory part comes in. And so yeah, I think ODIN could be a future traitor, and by traitor I don't mean that he's going to fight for humanity, I mean full-on enemy of the gods, mainly against the Greeks. And one of the biggest giveaways I think was when we see Zeus in that small dialogue he has with ODIN, where Zeus just looks at him very ominously and tells him Ragnarok isn't going quite as expected, now is it, leader of the Norse? Now there's many ways this can be interpreted, especially now that we know Buddha was in fact a traitor. Maybe Zeus is just asking ODIN this sarcastically because it could be they both knew somehow Buddha was planning planning to switch sides, but just seeing Zeus give this glare that feels more intimidating than anything else just makes me feel even Zeus is suspicious of Odin. And now that we know Buddha ended up being the traitor, I think this is exactly what Loki was hoping for. I think Loki's role in all this was to find a scapegoat, to pretty much throw all the attention on so that no one suspects Odin's future plot. Now, if you're wondering why even go through all this, it's pretty much just because at the moment in the story, it looks like the Greek gods are the ones in charge. And now that the Greeks are down two of their strongest fighters, Poseidon and Heracles, then this just makes this the perfect moment for Odin to steal the throne from Zeus. And even more so because Thor won his round against Lubu, it just makes the Norse gods look so much more stronger at the moment than the Greeks. And we have to consider also, why are we seeing fighters like Jack and Kojiro again if they're not going to fight a second time, right? It just makes me believe they're reappearing for a conflict that will be separate from the tournament, and I can totally see that being the case with Odin, where it could be that there will be a full-on war between the gods, specifically between Zeus and Odin. So at the moment, what I'm really waiting for is the end of round 6, because there's 4 characters in particular that I want to see after the end of it. And it's Odin, Zeus, Loki, and Thor. And in the last video where I talked about Odin being a traitor, I don't think I touched on Thor being a part of this, but now that we're seeing him again in just a very mysterious light, I think it could be he's just waiting on standby for a future fight. And we all know Thor's personality. I think now that the Greek gods are just so much weaker without Poseidon and Heracles, it's fair to assume he'd want the strongest gods to rule on top. So I think Thor and Odin could potentially be on the same page here. But to be honest, I think a lot about this theory really depends on how round 6 ends, because depending on Buddha losing or winning, I think this will affect the way Odin reacts next with his plan. I mean, round 6 in general is a very unique fight. We've had no other round so far set under these conditions, so I'm curious to see how Odin, Loki, Thor, and Zeus all react to however the end of round 6 goes. Now, this theory could be completely wrong, and I am totally fine with that, especially now that the gods are down in fighter and humanity has an extra Valkyrie. This whole traitor theory might not even happen, but I do think it's an interesting take considering we know how dominant the gods are even between each other. Like how we saw Shiva react to Zeus when he wanted to fight in round 2, or how Buddha just does whatever he wants. Ultimately, whether or not Odin is going to betray the gods or not, I do think there is something ominous about whatever's on his mind, so I'm interested to see if this all ends up being true or not. Alright guys, so that's gonna be it from me. Just wanted to brush up on this theory of mine a bit because it's been a while since I made that video, and considering how everything's been going with round 6, I think we could expect a lot happening even before the beginning of round 7. So I'm gonna leave it there guys. Let me know how you all feel about this theory. If there's something you agreed or disagreed on with, let me know in the comments, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you're down for more Record of Ragnarok content. That'd be awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for watching guys. Have a great day.